Hi, everybody. Welcome to Talk Automotive with Mark and John. My name is John Sinclair and my co-host, Mark Palavestra.
Today, we've got Kevin Abood, an industry and well-experienced dealer principal with a background in finance and operations. Kevin shares his experiences on what it takes to go into a dealership, look for opportunities, turn it around, and maximize the profit in both sales and after sales, with an overall great outcome for customers and the dealership.
Kevin's got fantastic experience, and this experience comes through, and he shares with us the real hands-on practical things you should do when running a dealership and looking how to maximize profitability. So really good listen. So let's jump into it.
With 30 years' experience in auto logistics and state-of-the-art locations in 5 major Australian cities, Precar Fleet Services is an independent division of Precar Services, offering specialty fleet fit-outs for commercial applications ranging from simple tray and tow bar fitments to fully bespoke service body and accessory installation. With quality-assured safety, compliance and standardisation of vehicle builds, Precar Fleet Services are a premier all-in-one solutions provider for commercial vehicle fleet operators, leasing companies, and original equipment manufacturers. For further information on how Precar Fleet Services can assist in solving your commercial vehicle fit-out needs, please visit precar.com.au and click on the link to Fleet Services.
Okay, Kevin, thanks very much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show. Okay, maybe just to kick things off, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in the automotive industry?
Yeah, no, look, thanks, John and Mark, for asking me to come on to talking automotive. I've been in the industry for 33 years. Started off as an accounting person, so I started off as an accountant for Capital Motors back in 1988. So I've been in the industry for quite some time and have ranged through various different departments. So I started off as an accountant, moved into a financial controller role, company secretary, then moved into an operational role with Peter Warren Automotive. I was an operations manager there and became a general manager, dealer principal. So I've been doing dealer principal general management roles since 2006, 2007. So it's been about 15, 16 years that I've been doing that. So it's been quite an interesting journey. And one of the things with the automotive industry is that when you join it, you either stay there for a very long time or you're in and out very quickly. Fortunate for me, I've been in there for quite some time.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't get out of it once you're in it.
Yeah, it's incestuous.
It's I've actually had it told to me that the auto industry is like Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave. So it sounds like, Kevin, you've got it well and truly in your blood.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's quite an interesting thing because when you have been in the industry for some time, you sort of see people come and go quite regularly. But there's a lot of people that you've known over the years, and you've seen them progress through different areas, different departments, different dealerships, and it's quite funny. While you're competitive, you get a lot of strong bonds and friendships that have formed over the years with different dealerships and different people who have worked in the industry. And it's quite interesting that they all get on quite well. Most of them really, even though they're competitors, there is a pretty strong bond with a group of people, and they usually have lifelong friendships.
Your background is you're a finance guy who's moved through operations and into the running of a dealership as a dealer principal in a number of locations. So, and a lot of those businesses you've grown successfully, or you've turned businesses around. So what's the first place that you look to improve the business when you move in as a DP?
The first thing I start to do when I think, being a finance controller background and accounting background, I grab the accounts straight away. First thing I start looking at is benchmarking figures, looking at where we can get some economies of scale of cost reduction. Sometimes we actually don't spend enough in some areas, so you look at what you needed to do. But a lot of benchmarking to really try and get the data analysation going to find out where are the opportunities and what you can do in the dealership. It's quite vivid when you see people look at and they get their financials and they compare them. But if you can try and pinpoint a budget do some benchmarking. It will generally give you some sort of guidance of where there's opportunities for you to either grow the business or to get a cost reduction. And sometimes it's not about always cost reduction, but it's just doing things a little bit smarter with the people or a little bit smarter with some of your suppliers and what you're actually spending and how the dealership functions. Because a lot of people think that to make more money, you've got to always increase sales, but it's not always increase sales. It's also looking at opportunities of what's the cost of doing business, because the biggest cost you have usually is your people. So if you've got the cost of people, you've really got to make sure that they're effective. But you've also got a lot of supplies that you need to do. You've got your finance, your floor plan, you've got supplies of cleaning, security. There's a lot of other areas that you need to look at and find out what your supplies are costing you as well. And even just sometimes what you're paying for some of your supplies, if there's a cheaper way of doing it. There's a lot of different areas that I've done over the years. Generally, you would love to get more income. So you've got to look at your growth. So you look at your benchmarking for your sales, what you're doing in sales. Service opportunities are usually the one where I find the most improvements. A lot of dealer principals, general managers have come from a sales background and don't really understand the service side. Being a financial controller, I've had a lot of exposure to fixed operations. And that's one of the areas that I really get my hands dirty in and really delve into the figures, look at what we can do and what's the opportunities you get with servicing, because service is a very, very good income generator. And if you're not getting it right, then you're not really maximizing your opportunities.
Yeah, the service also plays a big role for future sales, because if you can get that right and do a good job, people will come back to you and buy from you again in the future. So as you say, I think a really good, important area of the business. Now, Kevin, in terms of when you come into the business, what are the type of behaviors do you need to change? And how do you change them?
First of all, you've got to look at the people that are there. Some people, when they look at a dealership, they go through and they just start changing people around. Sometimes it's not about changing people. It's about changing their attitudes or just guiding them and spending time with them. One of the things that I do is every day when I work in the dealership, I was sitting down, I'll go through every department. I'll talk to the mechanics. I'll talk to the cleaners. I'll talk to the detailers. I'll talk to the salespeople. Not just, hi, how you going? Sit down, find out what they're doing. How's it going? What are you doing today? Just have a conversation. It's amazing how much you get information when you walk through your dealership every day. Speak to every single person I see. I don't actually go see every person all the time, but if I'm walking past someone, I'll at least stop, have a conversation with them and just see how they're going, see what they're doing. And it's amazing the stories and the things you hear and you think, hang on, that's causing a problem. This is going to either affect sales, it's either going to affect service, or it's going to affect a customer. And you sort of get a lot of information from doing that. And it's taking that information on board and doing something and talking to the department manager. You've got people working for you. It's good to go through and just find out how they're going, what they're doing. And sometimes you see things in the dealership that you say, hang on, this isn't working right, or that's not working right. And you can sort of get a sense when there's something in the department that's not right. And by talking to people and walking around, you really get that opportunity.
So once you've spoken to the people, Kevin, how do you take them on a journey? So you find out the problems, you're identifying the opportunity. You mentioned attitude. How do you change the attitudes? What are the steps that you have taken to get people to embrace where you want them to go and behave in a way that you want them to behave?
Mark, most times with that, it's having staff barbecues. I introduced to a lot of dealerships, we used to have at least once every fortnight a barbecue, and not just where one will do it. Each department will take turns in cooking the barbecue, and those people would then come through. So the whole dealership would really get involved in the barbecues, because everyone would say, oh, it's barbecue this week. Service was going to put the barbecue on, or parts will put the barbecue on. So you would get them that opportunity. And then you start getting departments talking and finding out that the sales guys aren't so bad and the service guys aren't so bad. And they all start to form a bond of, we're here in this job together and we're all trying to get the same outcome. It's amazing how one department doesn't help the other department because they're a different department. And it happens in a lot of dealerships. But you try and create a common ground where the dealership comes together and they realise that at the end of the day, we're there to serve the customer. And we're there all to work together to get the best outcome, not just for the customer, but also for the dealership. Without a good customer base, a dealership won't be successful. And it's all about building that customer experience, but also the internal customer, which is the staff. It's important to keep them happy and to keep them all together and bonded. I've seen dealerships over the years where you walk in and you can see straight away, if sales will ask for something, service won't even bother trying to help them, or vice versa. It's quite interesting to get that internal customer being the staff working together with a common goal and letting the managers make sure that they know that their staff are there to help each other. And sometimes the opportunities are there to do it.
So you mentioned the rivalry between the departments. It is amazing. I've worked in a number of dealerships, and you're right. There's the sales versus after sales versus the parts guys hate the service guys. The service guys hate the sales guys. The PD department feels like they're off on their own and no one loves them at all because everyone's putting pressure on them. What specific behaviours do you see? Is there as far as, are they disengaged, or are they deceitful, or what sort of behaviours do you tend to see in underperforming dealerships?
And you raised a very good one, the pre-delivery department. One dealership I worked at, everyone was going, oh, look, sales did this, sales did that. We were hitting records and doing really well. And when the opportunity was there, I said, guys, it's fantastic that we hit some big records this month. I said, but you've got to remember, this record would never have been able to get out because we had to get the cars delivered to the customer. If it wasn't for the staff who received the vehicles from the compound, prepared the vehicles in pre-delivery, and the detailing staff, if it wasn't for them, and even the people that did the window tints and the paint protections, all that sort of stuff, if it wasn't for those all working so hard for us to do it, we would never have got those vehicles delivered. So when we did receive awards, we used to acknowledge the service staff and the pre-delivery staff with that award acceptance. So I used to take the staff for dinner, and I always invited service and the parts guys to the dinners. When we hit sales targets and we were achieving very good numbers, I didn't just take the sales team. We took the service team, the pre-delivery guys and the parts guys, so that everyone were together, so that we were able to actually spend a bit of quality time together. And it's amazing how those bonds start to form, because they see the recognitions not just with the sales team, it's with the dealership. And it's quite important to acknowledge their efforts, because they do all the stuff in the background. It's really important for them to really feel that they've been part of that award and that acceptance.
Yeah, Kevin, you make a really good point there. The guys in the back end of the business can often get neglected and not included, and when they play such a key part in achieving those targets or those volumes. Now, in terms of volume, you sort of mentioned it in the beginning. What are the type of strategies that you can do to try and grow volume, both short-term and long-term?
It's probably easier to grow volume short-term, but to keep that volume and keep increasing it. A lot of the dealerships I've had, I've increased volume very quickly, and that's through usually doing some marketing activity, but also putting some systems and procedures in place to ensure that when the customer leads come through, that they're actioned. The biggest downfall with most people, what they do is they go and they spend a lot of money on marketing, get the customers into the dealership, but the problem is, or even through the internet, the biggest problem they have is that they don't always follow through, and an inquiry will come through 2 days later. And you ask your staff, how did you go about that phone call? You'll find that in most dealerships, a lot of those calls are not even made to the customer after they made the inquiry. It's a lot of waste of resources. So to quickly improve it is to make sure that every inquiry is followed up within an efficient time. Like usually they say within an hour or 20 minutes is probably the most crucial time to follow those up. We are in a very busy environment, especially with COVID. There's been staff shortages across the network because stocks are tight. The timeframes of getting back to customers are increasing slightly. I see that out in the network at the moment. But normal times, where sometimes a customer hasn't been rung for 2 days. In dealerships that I've worked, most times I'll speak to the salespeople before they go home, and probably 2 or 3 times during the day. If I know there's fresh inquiries come through, how are you going with that inquiry? If they haven't got time, I usually actually grab the lead, contact the customer, and I used to actually do the follow-ups for them because I knew they were busy. But if they were sitting there doing nothing, I used to say, ring them now, and I'll wait and see how they go with the conversation. But if they're busy, sometimes you need that extra resource. I used to pick the phone up, and that doesn't happen in every dealership either. Customer experience is my number one priority, to make sure that if a customer's gone to all the trouble to either come to the dealership, or the customer's gone to all the trouble to put an inquiry online, that customer deserves to be answered straight away, not the next day or the day after or when we get time. by the end of the day, if we couldn't contact them, I'd send an email. Thank you for your inquiry. We'll be able to give you a call in the morning. Apologies. If you need, please call me, and I'll put my mobile number there. Just those type practices really help increase volume very quickly. It's once the customer's made contact and purchased, and it's the ongoing purchasing that gives that long-term volume increase. One of the dealerships I worked at, I'd say probably 60 to 70% of my customers that I was selling each month after about 4 years were repeat business or referrals. It's where you get the continual growth and the constant growth. And I know that some staff I'd worked with there, they're still getting people who had bought cars from there, still coming back and buying cars, and they do ask for me. It's that longevity of making sure that the control of the process and doing when the customer asks you to do something, do it. If you can't do it, say, sorry, sir, I won't be able to give you a call this afternoon, but do you mind if I give you a call tomorrow morning? It's just having that conversation that if you say you're going to call tomorrow morning, call. That's one of the other biggest mistakes. You promise a customer you contact them at a certain time, and it could go for sometimes 6 or 7 hours, or maybe the day after. You say, oh, I forgot to call that customer, I better call them. It's making sure the processes are in place to get those communication channels open where you're constantly communicating with the customer and commit to what you do.
So is it a matter of just doing what you say you're going to do?
That's basically, in a nutshell, that is exactly what it is.
Getting that increase in volume, so response times, getting some marketing, so you're getting more activity at the top of the funnel, and then it's really working that activity through the funnel. What about different biotypes? Do you have a cross section of biotypes, or do you just basically go for that retail customer?
The retail is quite a good channel to work, but one of the increasing to mark is the fleet side. What happens is if you do the job right, a lot of the customers, especially these days, they use novated leasing. And what happens is I've developed quite a very good database of lease companies that I dealt with over the years. And generally, it come from a customer who I dealt with or our dealership had dealt with, and they say they're buying the vehicle, they put it through the lease company, and the way you interact with that lease company or the fleet company, they end up calling you back and saying, look, I really enjoyed and I was happy with what level of service we've got another customer, can you quote on this? That gives you that exponential growth as well, that once you start to leave at the retail side, the fleet side is a very, very important part of the whole business. All targets include fleet. So the fleet market is somewhere between 35 and 50%, depending on the manufacturer brand. And if you're not doing fleet, then it's very, very difficult for you to maintain targets. I understand a lot of manufacturers have stepped away from incentives on targets, but it's at the end of the day, targets are generally built off your PMA and what your brand in that area should be selling. And if you're not achieving it, then that means that you're not actually getting correct results out of your dealership or it can produce.
Now, Kevin, that brings up a quite interesting point about incentive monies that on the table. So traditionally, a lot of manufacturers have put incentive money on the table. We're seeing the move to the agency model where that will all fall away and dealers will get a very fixed margin for doing basically the delivery of the vehicle. From your perspective, what is the best way for dealers to really maximize that incentive money that's often up for grabs? How best do they go about it to make sure they secure that money?
Well, look, a lot of them have gone to like a scorecard setup or a KPI setup. Some have stepped away from it completely and it's an annual bonus. To really maximize those opportunities, you've really got to break down the core of what the KPIs are or what makes up that incentive money and work out what they're trying to do to achieve it. Sometimes there's different areas and you've really got to stay focused on not just one of the areas, but you need to, I put it into a spreadsheet. So I made a table up and I used to track where we were heading with each level of that component. And talking to the manufacturer, you've got your BDMs who are on the road all the time and they have that information quite at hand. Every time you have a meeting with them, I used to talk to the BDMs about how we're tracking, where we're up to, is there a problem with one of the areas? And a lot of the incentive money also relates back to CSI. So your customer, again, it's doing what you say, get it done. If you commit to it, do it. And because a lot of the money these days is the customer experience is where the money is tied to, not just sales volume. And it's important to get all those components correct. And if you're doing it correct, you should just receive the incentive. But there are hurdles that come across the way. I've never worked in a dealership where there's another hurdle here or there, probably once or twice a day. but that's the challenges we face in the industry. We've just got to manage those processes that if something happens, we've got to action it.
And how often would you leave money on the table? Like, in other words, incentive money is there, it's there to be grabbed. You've got volume targets, you've got KPI targets for qualitative standards. How often would you say, well, I'm not going to go for that one, I'm 5 cars short for the month, let's not push to get that, and we'll just forego that money? Or is it something that you look at it and say, right, here is a tranche of money that I need to bank on, I will make sure no matter what I get that KPI and get that target incentive money, and then what do you do with it? Do you just pocket it all, or do you put some aside to trade with, or what's the process?
Mark, look, I start working on it from day one. It's important that if you really want to achieve those incentive monies, especially when they're sales target related, you got to start from day one knowing what your score rate needs to be. I track daily sales to target. You need to make sure that you're tracking that on a regular basis. If you do find yourself towards the end of the month that you're short, you've got to make a decision on whether you want to go for the target or not. And sometimes it may not be worth the dollars to it. So it depends on what dollars are involved, because sometimes to do that incentive, there is a cost of business to do it. So you might have to do some deals that you wouldn't normally do, and that could outweigh the benefit of what it is. So it really depends on what the incentive is and what the effect is on the financial result of the dealership. You've really got to start working on it regularly. It's very difficult just out of a 1 month say, this month I'm not going to do it, or this month I am, because it all depends on what the incentive is and how much value it is. Sometimes you would walk away from it if you work out that to achieve it, it's unachievable. We're going to lose more money than what we're going to make at the other end, and you may walk away from it. And that does happen from time to time. Fortunate for me, there wasn't many times where we've had to do that. Most times because I was very focused on that side of the business, I generally make sure we try and get there. Mind you, there have been a few times we didn't, but I would say that it's probably over 90% where we achieved the incentive monies to get the result.
And Kevin, another question whilst we're on this subject is, how dangerous is it not to go for the incentive money if everyone around you is actually getting it?
That's a very good question, Mark. It can affect your numbers, but financially, if you get it right and your processes are right, it's not about just throwing gross. A lot of people say that to get the incentive money, you've got to throw gross. It's really getting the process right, the follow-ups. And like I was mentioning earlier, that if an inquiry comes through, and keeping your customers, so that not when they buy the first car, it's about the continued sales and the referrals that they get and what you get from doing the process right. That will get you to your incentive targets. The biggest problem you get is that when you start to get those targets and you achieve it, the manufacturer does start to increase the volume they expect from the dealership as well, because what happens is they get used to the dealerships achieving it, so therefore you should be increasing your volume each year. So sometimes it can create a bit of a spin that the manufacturer is putting your volume up because you're able to achieve more, and that then puts you onto a spiral where you have to actually sell more vehicles to achieve the same result that you would have achieved previously or more. At the end of the day, it's what drives the business. We're there to sell vehicles. And it's really one of the things I always say is that nothing happens till you sell a car. We're there to sell cars, and I've never seen a salesperson that doesn't want to sell a car. And if they do, they don't work there very long. It's really important to have the team focused on the results. I run morning meetings, and each morning we have where we are, where we should be, and once a week I'll put you're 1 or 2 cars behind your target. You need to get to this level. So it's constantly reminding the staff and letting them know that where their benchmark is as well. So my targets and the volumes that I was trying to achieve broke down by salespeople. And each day they would know where they are and where they should be so that they can track themselves, because it's important that no use me focusing on we're trying to achieve a target or an incentive. It's also they've got to achieve their target and their incentive. So you need the staff buy-in to achieve your incentives really, because without your staff doing it right and knowing where they need to get to, you will never get there. And that's really driving that. And service has become another component of the incentive monies. It's not just sales. So it's really working with your service team to ensure they're receiving it so you can receive the right incentive monies as well. So it's not just linked to sales a lot of the times these days. It's incorporating your parts, your service as well.
We have an unusual situation now where stock is really tight, and you mentioned that there are many brands that are going away from volume bonuses, mainly because there's just no stocks. There's no need for them to put the money on the table. But we know that situation won't last forever. And when the boats start coming with lots of cars, we foresee supply to loosen up towards the back end of this year. So getting back to a more normal, because I think we're still in a COVID unnormal or unusual situation, but getting back to what is normality, where there's supply equaling demand or supply exceeding demand, and there's target incentive money on the table driving dealers to achieve volumes that may be greater than the sales rates. Historically, has there been, and going forward, is there likely to be still, the situation where dealers use that target achievement money to trade in? And the risk is if you don't go for target, therefore you're financially worse off than a dealer who is getting target.
Most definitely. We usually do use that money sometimes, but I wouldn't use it on every deal. You do need to focus that you need to get the incentive. So if my run rate was a little bit low, you will do a deal generally that you may say, look, it's a little bit skinnier than what I'd normally accept. It's especially with fleet deals, you need to trade with that incentive money sometimes, because you're not getting paid on it just on that. You're getting paid on it across all the vehicles you sell. So sometimes you've had to use that money, but you don't always have to. It all depends on what you need to do. But it's really, each day is different because your sales volume changes daily. And the incentive money, there are some dealers who use it on every sale, and they give it to the salespeople to trade to. I usually control that. They didn't know the incentive money's there, so I would know what I would need to do. So I'd speak to the salesperson and say, look, go do that deal, because I knew that I need that to get the deal done. But that didn't happen every day. That would happen probably once or twice a month, where you'll do that just to get the deal. And sometimes it's also that you put a lot of work into it, and you need to keep that morale of that salesperson sometimes up, that another deal has used incentive money and they've come back to you and given you the opportunity. So you need to work out, do I want to lose the guy that lives 5 minutes from me that's going to be servicing with us and may never come back because he may go to the other dealership, buy the car, and say, geez, what a great experience. They looked after me, and my dealer the dealership down the road didn't look after me. And then he tells all his friends about it and family, saying, oh, look, I went there, but I didn't end up buying the car. I ended up going here. They're so much better, this and that. So it starts to affect your PMA sales, and they start spreading it to their friends and family. And that, especially if they've had a good experience, people talk, and they talk if they've had a bad one. So it's quite a... if they've had a bad one, they'll more likely tell them about the bad service they might have got from the dealership, and that's why they went elsewhere. And it's really just, you've got to balance that up.
Yeah, I think the saying is, Kevin, if someone has a bad experience, they'll tell 10 people. If they have a good experience, they might tell one person. That's always a big challenge of it. Now, Kevin, in terms of, we spoke a little bit about the fleet business at the beginning, and you said how important it was, and it made up, say, around 35% of the business, and that you dealt quite a bit with the leasing companies. Can you tell us a little bit more about the fleet market, the type of fleets there are, and how you approach that business?
With the fleet are quite an important component of the way I run the business, because they assist you with your volume. What it is it's the fleet market is a very, very competitive market. So it's not where you make a lot of money, but that also makes sure that you hit your targets. So if your franchise doesn't have targets, and I've spoken to a few people over the last probably 3 months or 4 months where some of the manufacturers have gone away from incentive monies on volume and targets, they've walked away from fleet. But the problem with that fleet thing is that the people who buy fleet cars also have private vehicles. They're not just buying that. So I've had several fleet customers who've come back and bought cars for their partners, their children. So it's not a matter of just getting that experience once and worrying about a fleet deal. And this is probably a short-term effect. What, Mark, you mentioned earlier about stock being very tight, and with COVID, there's not a lot of stock around. More and more dealers are saying, well, we're not giving any further discount other than what we're supposed to for National Fleet. So it's whether the fleet company want the vehicle, we have the stock. If they don't want it, someone else will come in and buy the car. So there's a lot of communication now doing that at the moment. But that's a very short-term outlook, because not maintaining these relationships, when the fleet companies start to get a bit of choice between dealers and stock becomes normality, and that could be anywhere between 6 months and 2 years. We don't know how long the stock situation is going to be with COVID, etc. But as time goes through and stock improves, we've got to remember that the fleet companies will remember, or say that dealer did keep the onus of the agreement we originally had and looked after us and those opportunities. You can have a short-term gain, but you might have a long-term loss, because over time, they may not come back and buy vehicles off you. So it's really getting that balancing act of knowing what you want to do. But fleet is an extremely big component of the way I run business. And it's no different to what I do with the retail customer, John. I treat them with the same respect, communicate with them. Importance in fleet is the communication channel. And if they send a quote request, actioning it straight away. Most times I actioned it within 20 minutes to half an hour. There were some times where it might be 3 or 4 hours, but I would generally send an email back or put a note saying, unfortunately, I'm in the meeting. I will give you a call shortly, or I will send the quote through. This time, is it okay? And sometimes they'll extend the time. They'll wait for my quote to come through before they hand the quote out and give the business to the dealer who's the best price. Or sometimes it's not about price, it's also about service they give. And that, so it's really working those fleet customers to give them the right process again, because they get measured on their processes, and the dealership, if they're not doing the right thing by the fleet company, and if you say, yep, we've got the car in stock, make sure you got the car in stock. Some people say, oh yeah, I've got the car, and then they try and find it, and then they find out that you didn't have it, and that gives that fleet company a bad experience, because they'll go tell their customer, we've found the vehicle, yep, we'll be able to get it by such and such a date, and then the dealer doesn't have it in stock, and then you find that the stock swaps request coming through for a vehicle you've got in stock that you've lost the business for, and the fleet company then come back and say, look, we went to the other dealer, they didn't have it, do you have the car? And you'd say, yes, you do, because that's one of the questions they do ask is the vehicle in stock? And if you say yes, it is. If it's not, say no, because I'll come back to you, look, you were the best price, but we didn't give you the business because you haven't got it in stock, but can you get the vehicle? If you do, we'll give you the business. And it works around that way. So it's really important to be very, very upfront and honest in your approach.
Now, Kevin, you talk about, obviously, volume and profit here. So when we talk about gross, retaining gross, how do you retain gross to maximise profit?
Look, retaining gross, it's one of those things that all customers want to have a win. At the moment, there's very little negotiations going on. And the biggest problem is that the gross, each customer is expecting a different price. So it's really given the opportunity that you try and maximise what you believe you can sell the vehicle for and retain the business for the customer, and work in what you're going to achieve out of it. So your business really makes up of several components. You've got the financing income, you've got aftermarket income, and you've got the sale of the vehicle. So it's really negotiating to the best of the ability of the person. And each salesperson has a different ability to maintaining gross. And you'll find some salespeople who are able to make gross always make gross, and the ones who can't make gross don't make gross. And it's really trying to get their processes in place that they start to engage the manager a lot quicker. So if you're not making gross, involve the manager quicker, or look at the process of how you can improve it so that you're not going straight to the bottom line and that straight to the best price you can give. So it's really challenging the salesperson to negotiate properly rather than just go to the cheapest price they can do and they try and get the sale done quickly. And that's where a lot of gross erodes very quickly, is that they try and get the order straight away. Sometimes you do need to say, no, we can't do that deal to the customer, rather than lose money. And it's a matter of if the customer comes back, because that's where it is, especially now with stock so tight. That's where a lot of dealers are going, is there's very little negotiation going on in the gross.
Now, Kevin, we've covered a lot of topics today, but if you come into a business that's run very poorly and losing a lot of money, what are the things you'll do to turn around that business?
Look, first thing, I would get back to what we discussed earlier, doing some analytical work on the data, on the financials. That's the important part. Set some benchmarks, talk to the managers, talk to the staff, find out where the inefficiencies are. One of the biggest things is to really turn a dealership around. And I think we really haven't talked a lot about it, but stock management is the biggest loss where you find a lot of it comes through. When you start to develop old stock, not ordering the right stock, not having the right stock in stock and available for the customer. So if you get the wrong vehicles and you've got to try and move them, that makes it extremely hard. So one of the first things I do is start to look at the stock as well. And stock management is a key to a profitable dealership. If you're not ordering the right stock or making sure you got stock, there's some dealerships at the moment haven't got stock because they never ever forward ordered, or they don't believe in forward ordering. The factory's always had stock for them. So now they're trying to develop practices of forward ordering, but a lot of vehicles you can't order now because of the silicon chip and all the issues that are out there with that. And COVID, some manufacturers aren't building certain types of vehicles at the moment because they can't get all their components. So that's creating their own thing. But to really improve a dealership that's losing money, you've got to work the financials to find out where it's going on, talk to the people. Are they the right people? Do the staff have a vision? Do they understand what their job is? Are they marketing the business? Are they following their customers up? Are they working their database? Like most dealerships have like a lot of the customers anywhere between 2,000 or 3,000 customers a year that they can work your service database. So it's really getting the customers to come back. Now, if your service department hasn't been treating the customers right, even if you market to them, they might not come back and buy vehicles. You've got to look at your service retention. Who customers are coming back? Are you losing customers in the first and second year? If they're not coming back and servicing with you, is that creating a problem? Is there a service issue that we're losing money from there? Because your service department should be making you consistent money. And that should be really an area where you're making a good return to help fund the fixed overhead cost. And if you're not doing that right, then the front end's not going to work because you're not getting the customers that life cycle. The customers come in, they buy a car, service with you, then they come back and buy another vehicle. Most customers keep cars between 3 and 10 years at the moment. So if someone's driving for 30 years, they can buy anywhere between 3 vehicles or 10 vehicles. And if you've done it right, you should be able to sell them the majority of those vehicles if they want to continue with the brand they've had. And if their experience has been good, customers are very loyal to their brands. And that if they've had the good experience, there are some times where you don't always have that and they keep coming back. But customers do like to stay with something they're familiar with if they've been treated correctly.
But it's always interesting. We had an old management accounting professor, and he always said to us, when you come into a business, what do you do on the first 3 days that you move into that business? And he always said on the first day you come in, you pick the biggest and best office and you move in there. So that's stamping your authority. He said on the second day, you must fire the financial guy, because he said the only reason the company's losing money because the financial guy wasn't doing his job. And he said on the third day, you get all the checkbooks and credit cards and everything, and you put them in your bottom drawer and you lock the bottom drawer. So you stop all excess expenditure. And it's such a very practical way to look at it. But I think it's really resonated in my mind of when you go into a business and what you need to do. And I think you're covering some of that. Get into the detail, start doing analysis and see exactly what's going on. So very fascinating.
It's amazing when you start to benchmark your dealership and just have a look at it. Some of the sort of, especially in sales, and that if you're not getting the 12 to 15 vehicles per salesperson, do you have the right number of people? Do you have the right processes? And one of the things I do, it's not just the analytical work, but it's also looking at the processes of what they're doing with the data. What are they doing? How many times does the phone ring? If you hear a phone ring, don't let it ring. Pick it up. Answer the phone. And that you'll find that someone walks past the phone and you say, why aren't you answering the phone? No, it's not my phone. Yeah, but it's a customer or maybe someone with something important trying to find out where their car is, or they're trying to buy a vehicle. You've just walked past the phone ringing. Those little things that make them feel that they're all in it together, even though they're not in sales, or not even if they're thinking if someone's phone's ringing, they're trying to get them. Answer the phone, take a message. It's just really finding it out that you want the business to grow and you want the best for that business, but not that. It's the customer experience. So it all goes back to having the right people, process. Mark, I think you've mentioned this a few times in various meetings I've had, people and process.
It's interesting also, Kevin, that you mentioned the telephone. We would always look, from a national sales company, you'd get all the data from the dealer net dealerships. for daily order write. And there'd be telephone, email, walk-ins. If you think of human behaviour, for me to physically go to the trouble to drive somewhere, park my car, go through a lot that's probably very congested. Currently, right now, it's not, but in a normal situation, it would be, through an intimidating environment into a showroom that I feel that is going to be adversarial and have all the cards stacked against me. To walk in and not be responded to within 2 minutes is an interesting experience. And we see good dealerships, and mystery shops show good dealerships respond quickly and appreciate that person has gone to a lot of trouble to physically come to that dealership. And then you mentioned also the telephone that we often leave, and you hear in dealerships, the phone being unanswered. It's ringing away at someone else's desk. Not mine, someone else's. That's not my problem. But for someone in this day and age to physically pick up a telephone and use their voice to speak to someone means that they're actually at a heightened level of need. If you walk in, you've got a super high level of need. If you're actually calling someone, you're prepared to have a dialogue immediately with someone, which is an escalated view or as a state of mind. And it's funny, the emails. We're all email warriors. The beauty of email, text, you can send information off and you'd like to get an answer back, but it's more anonymous, even though it says who you're from, but you're not using your voice. You're not physically there in the present. You can send maybe 2 or 3 emails off to make inquiries. So you're sort of a little bit lower down the funnel. You still need to be responded to quickly, but it's funny that we don't look at those 3 types of inquiries in different ways. Because it's that walk-in and phone, they are critical because those people are basically, through their behaviours, are showing, I'm really needing to engage with you and I'm vulnerable and I'm putting my vulnerability out there. And the understanding of the response to that vulnerability is how quickly you respond and then how you respond. And it's interesting you say that you ask the question and you'll actually answer that phone if no one else is answering. So why don't you answer that phone, or why don't you call that customer back? If they've emailed you and they've left a phone number, call them, because then there's that increased level of engagement because it's a dialogue, not a monologue with an email going back.
Yeah, but Mark, even now with COVID, because your website is an extension of your showroom. So if people come onto your website and no one monitors or engages with those people on the website, it's similar to someone coming into your showroom and ignoring them. So I think that's where your dealership's evolving and the way we sell evolve. And it's probably some of the things we need to look at going forward. How do we engage with those customers and talk to them when they're on your website? Because they might never come to your showroom.
And that's a good point, John, because you're right. There are now electronic tools to have that same level of dialogue immediately, whereby someone comes to your website. It's exactly the same thing as coming to your showroom physically. They're physically on your website, but you need to interact with them, because once they move onto someone else's website, you've lost them.
Yeah, look, there are a few tools out there where they can chat now. So if you get an inquiry online, you can say, hi, hey, and they try and get some dialogue happening. And look, there are leads that come from that. Sometimes people just researching, they don't really take it, but from sort of looking at it, we were getting probably 3 to 5 of those inquiries through chats where people were on the website would communicate with you, and it would lead to an inquiry. Sometimes I would just on there to research, see what stock's available, but that does happen a fair bit. And the thing is, Mark, it's really, and John, the thing is, it's really, technology's changed a lot in the way we do things, and we've really got to move with what the times are. And I think a lot of dealerships are improving in some aspects with what they're doing. With COVID, it's putting added pressure because people are ringing dealerships and people aren't scared to travel interstate to buy a car. And that happens quite a fair bit, where people aren't worried. If they've got to get a vehicle, they'll go outside. They'll buy the car, but they still want the service locally. So it's important to keep that channel up. If you haven't got the stock at the moment, they'll still service with you in most aspects. But people are always willing to move and buy a car from somewhere else. And that's why it's so imperative to make sure your processes and it's getting to the customer. Over the years, I've seen several times a salesperson, you'll see a person, like you mentioned earlier, they'll travel maybe half an hour, 45 minutes stay at the dealership for 1 to 2 hours, or trying to get some inquiry. They might have waited for a salesperson for a little bit of time before they can actually speak to someone, and they might have spoken to finance, and they get refused test drives. And it's one of the things I've seen that happen when sometimes I've walked through and past someone and they go, sorry, no, I can't test drive you today. I've got another appointment or something. And you quickly grab that customer and you try and educate the salesperson. Never refuse a test drive. But I don't think the customer's ready to buy. But how do you know? They've spent all that time coming here, and when they're trainees and stuff, you start to hear that sort of stuff. And sometimes experienced people try to read the customer rather than listen to the customer. And they've refused test drives. If I ever heard of a test drive being refused, I used to actually physically stop the customer. No, sir, madam, I'm right. I can take you for a test drive. I would actually take them for a test drive. And 8 out of 10 times, they resulted in a sale, maybe not that day, but the day after or a couple of days later. And it's quite, sometimes salespeople can become too complacent and try and read the customer saying, no, they're not ready to buy or they're not going to buy today. And they want to get on to the next person so they can try and sell car to the next person. So it's sometimes slowing them down. One of the things I've always done in dealerships is I love putting trainees on and training them. I've had a great success with trainees. One of the things I always do is I don't like to always get existing salespeople to just bring them in unless I really need to have someone with experience and to show a bit of leadership or some experience to the rest of the team. But I've always had at least, probably if I've had 4 salespeople, I'd always have at least 1 trainee at all times. Sometimes I've actually put an extra trainee on, even though I had an experienced team, because if you want to increase your volume, you've got to be prepared for that volume coming through. And if you get a trainee, it's not costing you as much as a full salesperson if they're not achieving the numbers, but you've got, then that gives you time to train them correctly. They can spend time with the experienced salesperson. You can train them. I prepare scripts, which a script is different. A telephone script is different to the walk-in script and then the email script. So I have scripts which I've prepared over the years, which I educate them with, and I say, use these templates when you're doing it, learn it and understand it, because these are the questions you need to qualify the customer correctly, so you know how you're going to handle the customer and make sure the customer's got all the information and the process and they've got the information they need to make a decision on buying the car. So there's a lot of tools out there that we can do, and it's about really spending time. And if you put a trainee on, commit to training the trainee. Don't call them a trainee and say, okay, here's the floor, go practice on the customers. The last thing you want them doing is practice on real customers. So a lot of the times I would spend time with the trainee. I'll have them with salespeople who are experienced, who I could trust that they're going to teach them the right way. And if they need to get some further guidance, before they actually went to the customer, I actually used to spend 1 or 2 days with every customer they were with before I let them start talking to customers by themselves. And so the first couple of customers, I used to teach them what they need to do, put them with the salesperson, and then before I let them be on their own, I always made sure that I was with them and gave them that guidance. And when I felt confident they could do the job right the way I want it done, that's going to produce the right level of experience for the customer, that's when you can launch them to the customer and let them start to go by themselves.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I'd like to summarise our discussion because I think it's been you've provided some great insights and great value to our listeners who want to know how to turn around a dealership. So just reviewing your background, it helps very much if you've come back from the financial side. So understanding the financials, understanding operations, so the numbers, how things work, and then leading as a DP. So you're well credentialed in that area. But then you highlighted what are the first things that you look at, and you talked about benchmarking. And that's, I think, getting back to your financial background there, where you analyse the data, because the data will tell you everything. And just when you do that deep dive, compare them to benchmarks of all the different parts of the business. And that stock management part is a critical bit. Making sure, A, you've got the right stock, B, it's not too old, and C, you've actually got a pipeline of stock coming that's matching your volume ambition, because you then tie in, well, how do you create that volume ambition? Because obviously the status quo is not where you want to be, current state, future state. So what is the plan to get the future state to have that volume ambition that you need to get? So what you look at is people and process. You find out what is going on, you ask the people who are there, you engage with them, you put a barbecue on to get the interdepartmental connection going on. So what you then find out is that these teams actually start working better together, so there's more efficiency. And also you find out where the roadblocks and problems are. And if you've got any attitudes, it's the opportunity to change that. But the most important attitude that you highlighted was this whole attitude of being customer-centric. And that really came through in every comment that you made, whether it was about the dealership's profit or dealership's volume. It all came down to being customer-centric, because nothing happens until you sell a car. So you talked about responding to customers, marketing and just getting the messaging out first, but making sure you actually respond to customers and look after existing customers that you've got, but also existing leads that you've got, and treating them with respect. Also looking at fleet, but you treat fleet the same way as you treat retail, and you actually get referral business from the fleet customers for private buyers. But the other beauty of the fleet business that you do is that you actually build that pipeline ongoing into the future. So you're targeting between 35 and 50% of the volume to be that. And it's interesting because fleet is actually 35% of the Australian automotive market. So it makes sense for where your plans are and why, when you look at your volume targets and the KPI money, which maximizes profit for the dealership, you look at all the things that you need to do, but you don't falsify the results. You go back to being customer-centric in everything that you do will enable you to achieve your volume target because you're doing fleet and you're doing the retail properly. You get the KPI money because you're actually treating your customers right, and you're doing all the things around inventory management and all the qualitative standards that you need to do to have a good dealership. That's why the incentives are there. So if you're a good dealership and have your people and processes in place, you actually will make more money. No surprises there. But it's interesting just that the last one there is about you don't need to discount as much, but everyone needs a win. And that's a point I was keen to highlight with John when it comes to the agency model, because one thing you talked about, how do you retain gross profit, is that the customer want to have a win. Right now in COVID, there's not a lot of winning from a customer perspective. The win for the customer is, I can get you a car. But we know that will turn. And it'll be interesting to see the point that you raised about there needs to be a win for the customer with this agency model. But right now, in the businesses that you've operated and turned around very successfully and achieved very successful results, that formula of customer-centric, people process, benchmark, inventory management, follow-up, and just making sure you get all of those basics right around the customer will lead to a successful business. It's a credit, Kevin, and thank you.
Now, Kevin, thanks very much. It's great to have the opportunity to speak to you, especially when you've got so much knowledge and experience. So thanks from our side.
Thank you very much, John and Mark. I really enjoyed it, and thanks for having me on.
Hopefully you enjoyed our discussion with Kevin as much as we did. Kevin covered off some amazing information around what he does when he goes into a dealership, looking for benchmarks and turnaround opportunities. But primarily, everything comes back to getting that whole customer component right. Customer centricity, follow-ups, respecting the lead, respecting the customers, and that's how you build growth and get your KPIs. If you liked what you saw or heard, please follow us on our YouTube channel or on Spotify or iTunes. Flag us and subscribe, and also visit our website at autocurrents.com.
Thanks very much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.